A Quiet Life in Chalmette. In 1976, the community of Chalmette, Louisiana, sat just a few miles southeast of New Orleans, a working-class town where refinery workers, welders, shipyard employees, and homemakers lived simple, structured lives. The air always carried the smell of salt water from the marshes mixed with refinery smoke, and everybody knew everybody else's business. Among the thousands of families in Chalmette was 33-year-old Mary Ann Perez, a soft-spoken mother of three. Those who knew her described her as gentle, responsible, and loyal. She worked long shifts at a local telephone company, then came home to cook, clean, and take care of her children. Her life was not glamorous, but it was stable, predictable, built around routine and responsibility. Mary Ann was separated from her husband at the time, but she remained a devoted mother. She rarely went out, rarely drank, and rarely socialized outside of work. Friends later said that when she did go out, it was usually because someone encouraged her to take a break from stress. She didn't live boldly. She lived quietly. Yet, under that quiet life were the pressures familiar to so many single mothers of the 1970s. Low pay, high responsibility, and the heavy expectation that she had to hold everything together alone. Still, she faced each day with determination. As far as anyone could tell, she had no enemies, no dangerous connections, and no involvement in anything criminal. In every way that mattered, Mary Ann was ordinary, and that is what made her disappearance so shocking. On the morning of March 25, 1976, she woke up early, prepared her children for school, and left for work like every other day. There was no sign that anything unusual was about to happen. No warning, no fear, no message to anyone that her life was about to cross paths with danger. Her co-workers said she was in a good mood that day, tired but cheerful. She finished her shift as normal. She had plans to go out that evening with a friend from work, but that was nothing new. A simple outing, a few drinks, a short break from responsibility. Nobody knew that this ordinary Thursday would be the last day anyone saw her alive. The night at the Wagon Wheel Lounge. On the evening of March 25, 1976, after finishing her shift at the telephone company, Mary Ann Perez accepted an invitation from a co-worker to unwind at a local bar. The place was called the Wagon Wheel Lounge, a dimly lit neighborhood spot on Paris Road, known for cheap drinks, loud conversations, and a mix of regular patrons, workers, retirees, and the occasional drifter passing through. For Mary Ann, this wasn't a usual habit. Friends said she hardly went out at all, but she had worked a long week. She wanted a brief moment of adult life before returning to the responsibilities waiting for her at home. The wagon wheel that night was unusually loud, crowded, and tense. A storm was rolling in from the Gulf, and everyone inside could feel the pressure change. By 10 p.m., thunder was shaking the windows. The neon signs flickered in the moisture-heavy air. Patrons drank faster, voices grew louder, and arguments were easier to start. Mary Ann sat at the bar with her co-worker, sipping a light drink. The bartender remembered her as polite and soft-spoken, someone who clearly wasn't a regular. But as the night went on, something shifted. A man at the bar, described later as rude and aggressive, made comments toward her that led to a brief argument. Witnesses disagreed on what they heard, but everyone agreed that Mary Ann tried to stay calm. She wasn't a fighter. She wasn't confrontational. After a few minutes, the tension seemed to fade, but that interaction would later become a point of suspicion. Who was that man? Why did he focus on her? And did he follow her when she left? By 11:45 p.m., the storm outside was violent. Heavy rain pounded the street like hammer blows. The sky flashed white every few seconds. Visibility was almost zero. People lingered inside the bar just to avoid driving in the weather. Despite this, Mary Ann told her co-worker she needed to head home to her children. She excused herself politely, gathered her things, and stepped outside into the storm. Before she drove away, she made one last phone call, a quick message to her children, telling them she was on her way. The call was short, calm, nothing strange about her voice, no sign of fear or distress. That was the final confirmed communication from Mary Ann Perez. A few minutes later, someone in the bar noticed headlights pulling out of the parking lot. No one saw who was inside. No one paid attention. No one imagined that they had just watched the beginning of an unsolved disappearance that would haunt Louisiana for decades. The storm swallowed her car, and Mary Ann vanished into the night. The abandoned car. By the early hours of March 26, 1976, the storm that had shaken Chalmette through the night began to ease. The rain slowed. The thunder moved farther out over the marsh. And as the sun pushed into the sky, people began their routines, unaware that a major mystery had already begun to unfold. That morning, Mary Ann's children woke up expecting to see their mother getting ready for work. Instead, they found the house quiet. No movement, no sound of footsteps in the hallway. Her bed remained untouched. At first, they assumed she had slept at a friend's house because of the storm. But by midday, worry turned into fear. Meanwhile, only a few miles away, deputies were responding to a report of a car abandoned along a road near Perez Road and Old Gentley Highway, an area that bordered the wetlands. The storm had knocked debris across many roads, and abandoned vehicles weren't unusual, but this one stood out. It was Mary Ann's car. The doors were locked. The keys were not inside. There were no signs of struggle, no broken windows, no blood, no damage. The vehicle looked as if it had simply been parked and left. Inside the car were her purse and belongings, untouched, neatly placed. Nothing had been taken. Nothing was scattered. Everything appeared intact. To investigators, the scene was confusing. If Mary Ann had run into trouble, why was nothing disturbed? Why would she leave her purse behind? Why would she walk away from her car in the middle of a powerful storm? The area where the car was found added more questions. The road was dark, isolated at night, surrounded by industrial yards and marshland. It was not a road someone would pull onto by mistake, nor was it a place Mary Ann was known to visit. Even stranger, the location was slightly off the direct route home from the Wagon Wheel Lounge. Not far, but enough to raise suspicion. Had she taken a wrong turn in the storm? Had someone forced her off the road? Or had she pulled over because she was followed? As deputies processed the scene, one fact became clear. Mary Ann herself was nowhere to be found. No footprints in the mud. No tire tracks indicating another car pulled up beside hers. No evidence of a chase. Nothing. It was as if she had simply stepped out of her car and disappeared into thin air. By the afternoon, the Perez family officially reported her missing. Deputies began interviews, retraced her movements, and contacted the Wagon Wheel Lounge. But even with witnesses, even with a timeline, the case lacked the one thing investigators needed most: a direction. The abandoned car was a clue, but it led to nothing. The mystery of Mary Ann's disappearance had begun, and from this point forward, almost every step of the investigation would lead into confusion, contradiction, and dead ends. The whispering phone calls. In the days after Mary Ann vanished, the Perez home was filled with an atmosphere of fear, confusion, and unanswered questions. Family members stayed awake late into the night, waiting for the phone to ring, hoping for any news, good or bad, that could explain where she was. And then the phone did ring, but not with answers. Instead, it brought something far more disturbing. It began with a call from a woman. Her voice was low, shaky, almost whispering. She didn't introduce herself, didn't ask questions, didn't offer comfort. She spoke as if she already knew everything. Her message was chilling. "I know what happened to your mother. She's dead." Then the line went dead. At first, the family thought it had to be a cruel prank. People sometimes do horrible things when a missing person case hits the news. But then the calls continued. Not once or twice, several times over the following days. Each call carried the same tone, the same whisper, the same terrifying claim. The woman seemed deep in fear, as if someone was forcing her to speak, or as if she was afraid of being discovered. Her voice trembled. She sounded exhausted, emotional, almost desperate. She never gave her name. She never said what she knew. She never explained how she knew Mary Ann. But her words stayed consistent. "They killed her. You won't find her." Investigators tried to trace the calls, but the technology of 1976 made that nearly impossible when the caller spoke briefly and hung up quickly. Phone lines were still recovering from storm damage, complicating things even more. The family wondered, was this a friend of the person who took Mary, and a witness too afraid to confess, or a disturbed stranger seeking attention? One of Mary Ann's daughters later recalled that the caller didn't sound like someone playing a prank. She sounded like someone who was terrified. But there was another layer to the mystery. Some investigators believe the caller might have been connected to local biker groups known for violence, kidnapping, and intimidation. These gangs often had women who were controlled, abused, and sometimes forced into helping with criminal activities. Could the caller have been one of them? A woman trying to warn the family without exposing herself? Or someone trapped inside the same world that swallowed Mary Ann? Nothing about the calls brought clarity. They brought fear and questions with no answers. Then, just as suddenly as they began, the calls stopped. No more whispers. No more warnings. Only silence. The Perez family was left with a terrible uncertainty. Were those calls telling the truth? Or were they pushing the investigation in the wrong direction? The biker confessions. As weeks turned into months, the investigation into Mary Ann's disappearance grew colder. Leads dried up. Witnesses forgot details. People moved on with their lives. But buried beneath the quiet surface of the case was a dark rumor, one that began to take shape years later. The rumor involved a group known across Louisiana and Texas in the 1970s, a violent biker gang responsible for robberies, kidnappings, and assaults. They moved along highways, drifted between bars, and had no fixed place to call home. They were unpredictable, aggressive, and protected by a code of silence. Many investigators believe that if Mary Ann had crossed paths with the wrong individuals, this gang was the most likely suspect. The breakthrough came not immediately, but years later, when a biker, already in prison for unrelated crimes, requested to speak with law enforcement. What he told them was disturbing. He claimed that Mary Ann had been abducted outside the Wagon Wheel Lounge the night she disappeared. According to him, she was taken by members of a biker group who spotted her alone in the storm. He said she was forced into a vehicle, driven across state lines, assaulted, and killed. He claimed he personally witnessed her final moments. For investigators, this was both a shocking revelation and a suspicious one. Prison inmates often fabricated stories for attention, leverage, or reduced sentences. But then something unexpected happened. Other bikers came forward with similar stories. Their details were not identical, but the core remained the same. Mary Ann was targeted randomly. She was taken by force. She was assaulted. She was killed. Her body was disposed of somewhere between Louisiana and Texas. These confessions were given independently at different times from different prisons by men who had no connection to one another. Some named specific individuals. Some described specific locations. Some admitted to participating. Others said they only heard the story through gang circles. The consistency could not be ignored. Yet there were problems. Some timelines didn't match. Some claimed she was buried. Others said her body was dumped in water. One biker insisted she was kept alive for days, while another claimed she was killed within hours. The contradictions created confusion. Were they telling pieces of a truth twisted by time? Or were they repeating rumors overheard in prison? Despite the inconsistencies, investigators agreed on one thing. The biker stories were the closest thing to a solid lead the case had ever had. But there was a greater issue. No body, no physical evidence, and no confirmed witness where Mary Ann's remains were supposedly left. The confessions felt convincing, but they were not enough to bring closure. Some detectives believed the bikers were telling the truth. Others believed the group simply used Mary Ann's case as a way to elevate their reputation. Whatever the reality, the biker confessions added a dark and sinister chapter to the disappearance, one that suggested Mary Ann had fallen victim to random, unpredictable violence at the hands of strangers. But even this theory would soon collide with another shocking twist. The body that wasn't hers. More than a year after Mary Ann Perez vanished, a new development emerged, one that seemed, at first, like the long-awaited resolution to the case. In 1977, a set of female remains was discovered near a remote area in Texas. The body had been exposed to the elements for months, maybe longer. Identification was difficult, but investigators noticed similarities that matched Mary Ann's physical description. The timing seemed right. The location was plausible, especially considering the biker gang theory, which stretched across Louisiana and Texas. And the Perez family, exhausted, grieving, and desperate, clung to the possibility that they might finally have answers. After a brief examination, law enforcement told the family that the remains were very likely Mary Ann's. The decision was made quickly. Too quickly. The Perez family accepted the results. A funeral was arranged. A sealed casket was lowered into the ground. Friends and relatives gathered to mourn the woman they believed was Mary Ann. Her children cried. Her siblings cried. Everyone tried to find closure. But something was wrong. The remains were never properly confirmed. There was no DNA testing in 1977. The identification relied almost entirely on resemblance and circumstance. Still, the case was unofficially marked as resolved. Investigators moved on. Cold case files were closed. The world stopped searching for Mary Ann. But she wasn't done with the world. More than 20 years later, in the early 2000s, advances in forensic science allowed investigators to revisit old, unidentified bodies. DNA testing became routine, accurate, and essential. The remains buried as Mary Ann were exhumed and tested. The results were shocking. The body was not Mary Ann Perez. The woman buried in Mary Ann's grave was a stranger, an unidentified woman who had been forgotten by time and misidentified under the rush of a desperate investigation. The truth hit the Perez family hard. They had buried someone, but not their mother. They had mourned closure, but closure had never existed. The revelation reopened everything. Fresh interviews, renewed searches, reevaluation of the biker confessions, re-examination of every timeline, witness, and rumor. The mistake had cost the investigation decades. And now, Mary Ann's true fate was further away than ever. The person buried in her place remained unknown. Her real family, whoever they were, had never been notified. Another life had vanished silently, with no name, no history, and no justice. Meanwhile, Mary Ann's grave remained empty of the woman it was meant to hold. The case was not just unsolved. It had been misled, mishandled, and derailed for years. But this wasn't the last failure the investigation would face. The ghost trail of sightings. Following the shocking revelation that the body buried as Mary Ann Perez was not hers, the search for answers reopened. But even with renewed attention, investigators faced a chilling reality. There was no physical trace of Mary Ann anywhere. What remained, however, were a series of reports, some credible, some questionable, of sightings of Mary Ann across Louisiana and Texas. These sightings spanned years and became known among locals as the Ghost Trail. The first reported sighting came just weeks after her disappearance. A woman matching Mary Ann's description was seen at a small roadside diner along Highway 90, not far from the marshlands. The witness claimed she looked distressed, wet from rain, and seemed to be looking over her shoulder constantly. When approached, the woman vanished before the witness could get a closer look. Over the next decade, similar reports surfaced. A woman resembling Mary Ann was seen in motels along the I-10 corridor, often alone and in a state of nervous vigilance. Gas station attendants in small towns described a quiet, composed woman who fit her description. She would buy minimal items, sometimes cash only, and avoid conversation. A waitress in Beaumont, Texas, claimed a woman matching Mary Ann's appearance asked questions about local roads and directions, acting as though she was planning to leave town immediately. Some witnesses believed it was Mary Ann. Others thought it was a look-alike, or even a figment of hope and grief projected by those desperate to find her. Investigators documented each report meticulously, yet none could be verified conclusively. No fingerprints, no identification, no photographs. Only the fleeting presence of a woman who might have been Mary Ann. These sightings added to the mystery, fueling speculation. Had Mary Ann been abducted but survived? Was she living under an assumed identity to escape her attackers? Or were all the sightings mere coincidences, innocent people mistaken for someone else? What became clear was that the ghost trail created both hope and frustration. Each potential lead raised more questions than it answered, stretching investigators' resources and the family's patience. By the mid-1980s, the trail of sightings had slowed, but whispers of her presence continued to circulate in small towns and local communities. For some, Mary Ann became a symbol, a reminder that a person could vanish without a trace, and yet somehow leave echoes of their existence scattered across time and geography. In the absence of a body or definitive evidence, the sightings remained the closest link anyone had to Mary Ann Perez, a tenuous thread between the known world and the unknown. The investigation reopens. After decades of uncertainty, the disappearance of Mary Ann Perez entered a new phase in the early 2000s. Advances in forensic technology, particularly DNA testing, offered the possibility of finally uncovering the truth. Investigators realized that past mistakes, like misidentifying the body found in Texas, could be corrected, but only if the case was treated with renewed seriousness. The reopened investigation involved re-interviewing surviving witnesses, revisiting tips and leads that had been dismissed, examining old crime reports involving local biker gangs, reviewing phone records, newspaper articles, and family testimonies. Detectives noted a troubling pattern. Much of the original investigation had relied on assumption rather than concrete evidence. Reports were scattered. Leads were treated as complete rather than potential. And in some instances, pressure to close the case may have contributed to hasty conclusions. The renewed investigation focused on two main possibilities. Mary Ann was abducted and killed by criminals, likely the biker gang rumored to be operating along the Louisiana-Texas corridor in the 1970s. Mary Ann survived her disappearance, living under an assumed identity, possibly coerced, hiding, or trapped in a dangerous situation that prevented her from contacting her family. Investigators pored over the biker confessions from the 1970s. Some were inconsistent, others seemed believable, but without a body, nothing could be confirmed. Additionally, law enforcement began comparing reported sightings across Louisiana and Texas. Each sighting was documented carefully, but the trail was fragile. Eyewitness memories fade. Locations were often vague. People who came forward in the 1970s were no longer alive, and their statements could not be re-examined. Through these efforts, investigators identified a handful of credible leads. A former member of the gang had mentioned a burial site near the Gulf Coast, but by the time authorities investigated, the area had been flooded and altered. A motel manager recalled a woman staying for a week in the late 1970s who matched Mary Ann's description. Records were long gone. Some phone lines in the Chalmette area had been damaged during the 1976 storm, raising the possibility that Mary Ann's final call had never been traced accurately. Despite modern tools and renewed attention, no definitive answers emerged. The case remained open but unsolved. For the Perez family, the investigation reopening offered both hope and anguish. Every lead was a potential breakthrough, but every dead end reaffirmed the worst fear. Mary Ann Perez may have disappeared without a trace, and the world might never know what truly happened. The reopened investigation marked a new chapter in the story, not one of resolution, but a relentless pursuit against the limits of time, memory, and evidence. Theories and speculations. By the mid-2000s, decades had passed since Mary Ann Perez vanished. With no body and no confirmed sightings, investigators, journalists, and true crime enthusiasts began to explore a variety of theories. Each offered potential answers, but none could be proven. 1. Abduction and murder by strangers. The most persistent theory revolves around violent strangers, particularly the biker gangs operating along Louisiana and Texas highways in the 1970s. Proponents of this theory point to multiple independent confessions from imprisoned bikers, the pattern of crimes associated with these gangs, Mary Ann being alone, vulnerable, and at the wrong place at the wrong time. Critics argue that many confessions were inconsistent, and some may have been fabricated for notoriety or leverage while in prison. 2. Foul play close to home. Another theory suggests that Mary Ann's disappearance could have been orchestrated by someone she knew personally. Investigators revisited her personal relationships, including friends, co-workers, and ex-husband. Motives considered included jealousy, anger, or financial disputes. No evidence ever substantiated this, but it remains a point of speculation. 3. Voluntary disappearance. Some theorists believe Mary Ann may have chosen to disappear voluntarily, escaping pressures at home or responsibilities she could not handle. Supporters cite the lack of struggle and the calmness of her final phone call. Critics argue it's unlikely. Mary Ann left behind children, a stable life, and personal belongings. 4. Accidental death. Given the storm and the abandoned car, another possibility is that Mary Ann fell victim to an accident, slipped into a marsh, drowned, or was struck while walking. No remains have ever been discovered to support this theory. 5. A combination of factors. Some investigators suggest the truth could involve multiple overlapping factors. Abduction or coercion followed by accidental death. Miscommunication and false leads masking the real story. Regardless of the theory, one fact remains undeniable. Mary Ann Perez vanished without a trace, leaving a void in the lives of her children, family, and community. Her case became a cautionary tale of how quickly an ordinary life can be disrupted, how incomplete evidence and misidentification can hinder justice. The limits of investigation in a pre-digital era. Even today, discussions about Mary Ann's fate continue. True crime forums debate her story. Locals share ghostly rumors. Her case is studied by cold case detectives as an example of how investigative errors and time can bury the truth. The lack of resolution is what haunts the story most. A disappearance that refuses to yield answers, no matter how many decades pass. The legacy of Mary Ann Perez. Decades after her disappearance, the story of Mary Ann Perez has become more than just a cold case. It has evolved into a cautionary legend within Louisiana and among true crime circles. Her disappearance illustrates how an ordinary life can vanish in an instant, and how time, mistakes, and human error can leave a mystery unsolved for generations. Mary Ann's children grew up carrying the weight of uncertainty. Every milestone, graduations, weddings, family events, was shadowed by the unanswered question, where was their mother? Her story also impacted law enforcement. Investigators involved in the case have spoken publicly about the frustrations of working without modern forensic technology, the challenges of relying on witness testimony and confessions that could not be verified, the consequences of early misidentification of remains. Her disappearance remains an example for cold case units. How crucial early evidence is, and how small mistakes can create decades of confusion. Communities around Chalmette and New Orleans remember Mary Ann not just as a victim, but as a symbol of unresolved loss. Some locals recount sightings years later, keeping hope alive that perhaps Mary Ann survived in some hidden form, living a quiet life beyond their view. Online, her case continues to inspire discussion. True crime forums dissect every report, biker confession, and potential lead. Some theorists continue to propose new possibilities, ranging from abduction to voluntary disappearance, but no theory has been definitively proven. The disappearance also highlights a broader issue. In the 1970s, the absence of advanced forensic methods, limited communication technologies, and insufficient investigative resources made it far easier for someone to vanish without leaving a trace. Yet even with modern tools, Mary Ann remains missing. Her story is a stark reminder of how fragile certainty can be and how even ordinary people, mothers, daughters, neighbors, can become invisible to the world in a single night. As of today, her case remains open. Law enforcement still accepts tips. Investigators review old leads when new information emerges. And for her family, the hope of answers, though faint, has never completely disappeared. Mary Ann Perez may have vanished decades ago, but her story continues to resonate. A haunting mystery that challenges what we think we know about disappearance, crime, and the limits of human understanding.